Good. Good morning, everyone. I'm Rosemary Gray McNatt. I'm president of Starr King School for the ministry. I want to thank you for joining us this morning. This about our new beginnings. What's wrong now? No sound? Now it's fine. Okay. I don't know what happened there. I want to welcome you to this conversation about our New Beginnings projects, work. There are all kinds of names for it, but the most important thing for us is to be in conversation with you about what we can be in conversation about and explain the parameters of what the board and I and the staff and the faculty have been talking about in varying ways for the past few weeks. Still having trouble hearing the audio. I don't know what to do about that, but I assume people are working on that. I hope you can see me at least. And please know that we will be recording this so that if there are parts of this that you miss, you can go back and listen. Also, there are people who can't be here either this morning or this evening, and we want to make sure that there's an opportunity for people to be in conversation. I love that so many of you have dialed in. This is fantastic. Some of you all I haven't seen in a while, so it's really nice to see. Thank you for coming. Let me begin with the lighting of the chalice. If you would, as you are able, please join in the Starr King chalice lighting. With the kindling of this flame, we reaffirm our commitment to accept life's gifts with grace and gratitude, and to use them to bless the world in the spirit of love. Here we are. So there are people in the room, you just can't see them because they decided not to sit next to me. But that's okay, all right? I'm good. Sophia's here, Chris is here, we have students here, we have Matt and Xander working Zoom for us. So staff is in here and faculty's in here, and I'm glad to see all of you. So let me start with some headlines for you that may help with some, if not all of your questions. First of all, Starr King is not closing. So let's begin there. Starr King is not shutting down. What we are doing is responding to the larger theological school landscape. And I just want to give you some highlights about what's happening at the GTU. In the past month, the Episcopal School has basically merged with Trinity Wall Street, which is the big New York City church and real estate conglomerate. And they will become a seminary and leadership school for Episcopalians on the West Coast. Their board has dissolved completely because they don't need a board because Trinity are the people who run them now. That's number one. The Presbyterian School, San Francisco Theological Seminary, has merged with the University of Redlands. And even though they're for now going to stay in San Anselmo, they are most likely going to make some adjustments in the near future. In the past year to year and a half, the Lutheran School, Pacific Lutheran Theological School, has embedded in the Cal Lutheran University system. And even though Cal Lutheran is in Southern California, they're basically structured to be part of Cal Lutheran. They have sold their gigantic property to Zaytuna, the Muslim university, and they have rented a floor of a building in downtown Berkeley next to Berkeley City College. So why am I telling you all this? There's more, but I can't remember them all. I'm telling you this because theological schools are having to be more nimble, make different moves than they've had to make up until now, and make changes for their continuing sustainability and survival. Unless you're Harvard University or you are Liberty University, you are probably trying to figure out how you're going to navigate theological education in this changing landscape. So we are not any different than any other theological school, certainly up here on the Hill, except that Starr King is different, which leads me to tell you about why you all know about this right now. Under regular circumstances, the board and I would not be talking about this publicly for at least another 6 months to a year. And that's because we're at the beginning of a process. We're looking at possible partners. We're talking about possible moves. We're doing all these things that we're examining so that we can ensure the survivability and the sustainability of Starr King. And ordinarily, those things are done quietly and privately. But Starr King is a different kind of theological school. And one of the reasons that you all know about this is because we decided that it was important to talk about it, to not allow rumors to drive the process, and to make sure that students were aware of what was happening, that donors were aware of what was happening, and that we could answer questions, deal with concerns, and get ideas from you at this process before it got locked in stone. So there are things that I can't talk about because they are faculty or staffing issues. They are negotiations that might have begun that are in process. And since most places are not like Starr King, when you're trying to create a partnership with someone else, you don't want them to hear about the fact that they're in partnership conversations with you out on the street and in the world. So there are privacy and confidentiality concerns. Let me take that back. There are confidentiality concerns that we have to deal with. But we wanted to make sure that you had a chance to ask questions and make comment. By the way, I want to advertise once again the future@sksm.edu address. That's a really important address, because if you want us to know something, or you have an idea, or you have a concern, that's the address you need to write to so that we get a chance to look at it, consider it, and answer it. It gets read by myself, chair of the board, our communications officer, so it gets looked at. We may not see other comments from other sources. We may not see the conversations that are going on among the students. But if you want us to know about it, future@sksm.edu is the way for us to be aware. So that's what I wanted to make sure you knew before I began. And I want to make sure that whoa! Okay. Can you all see me? Wave if you can. Okay. Great. So I want to make sure that I answer as many questions as I can in the 50 minutes that we have left to talk. If, as I said, this is going to be recorded so that if you missed the beginning, you can play it again. And this is for people who may not be able to stay or who weren't able to be here. So I'll take as many questions as I can. And I think if you have a question, you should make yourself known to us and raise your hand, and we will try to stack. Can we use the chat? Okay. With help, I can use the chat. So we also, you can type questions in the chat and we'll take them from there. Anybody got something they want to bring up right now, just wave your hand. All right, we're going to do a stack. I see Isabel, Anthony, Craig. Isabel, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for making this opportunity to have a discussion. I'd like to hear about how this ongoing work relates to the revision of ECO and other visioning that the school is engaged in. And ideas for how we can have more dialogue and not just feedback. I mean, I personally haven't written to feature at SKSM because I feel like I'm in a conversation stage. I don't have feedback, and I'm not clear on what would happen to it. But I'd like to be in a creative space, and especially, I mean, I'm excited about the discussions about eco revising that, and it seems to me that we really need to be a different school, and that the financial and spatial aspects of that are just a part of our becoming ready for the future.
That's a great question. So, you know that there is a Team Eco and people who are working on conversations around how people experience the school. And that's a different set of conversations for the time being than the conversations that we're going to be having about curriculum. Right now, those conversations are going to have to wait until we get through commencement and a couple of things, most likely this little space in June before we all go to General Assembly and take July off. But it's been clear to Gabriella and myself that we are going to need to rethink the curriculum basically from the ground up. We were just talking about this the other day. But there are several reasons that we can't work on that right now. Chief among them is our reaccreditation visit from the Association of Theological Schools, which occurs in September, right? So there's no appropriate way to start looking at larger issues of curriculum until we finish with the review of the entire school and get feedback from ATS, and then start thinking about some of the things that we've been talking about. Gabriella is actually here. Gabriella, you need to come sit right here so people can see you. So the part that you're talking about is not yet the part that we're working on. Yes.
I wanted to add that, I mean, eco is not just the curriculum in the philosophy of the school. It's the way we engage across the school with all its limitation and challenges and inconsistency. And one of the things that the board has done at the last board meeting is to ask for an extensive amount of time to engage with the eco training that included going back to the document and its meaning and engaging the questions that the board was faces in terms of the future in light of our eco commitment and how we understood it. So I think it's fair to say that that discussion about what is eco and how we embodied it in our diverse understandings and limitations, it was embedded in, at least especially in this last part of the discernment of the board.
I don't think we can emphasize that enough. Every board meeting for the last year has included some eco work for the board because eco is so central to our identity and so non-negotiable for who we are as a school that any conversations that we needed to have about other things needed to include this eco reality and how it is that we want to make sure that we are not playing into systems of oppression, even as we're trying to make some difficult decisions financially, spatially, all this other stuff. It's a balance that we are determined to keep. So that is always a non-negotiable for us. But the actual physical, let's look at the curriculum, let's see how we want to teach differently, let's do other things, that part can't be done yet. But the philosophy and the foundation of the school, eco is always present. Does that help? I think you had another thing you wanted to ask me about.
No, that's my question. I guess I'm not sure I agree. I think that eco, or whatever we call it, like our visioning process, I don't see how that can wait.
The visioning process around what?
Around who we are and how we need to adapt to the future.
But what I'm trying to help people understand is that in terms of our work as a board, it has not waited. It has been part of our conversations. What's had to wait is the actual physical classes, how they're structured, those kinds of things. We're ultimately going to have to do that work. Gabriella and I have been talking about that for a while, but that has to, for a minute, be put not away, but over here while we do ATS, which is the most pressing thing that's happening in this building right now, other than the conversations that we're having.
Maybe it's fair to say that actually they're not completely distinct in this tight way.
Yeah.
Is that while we have conversation, we make a judgment to courses and some of that. In the moment that we don't know how many faculty can we have, how can this, what is going to be the future? We cannot make any major adjustment the two things have to go hand in hand, I think. And so we don't have a big plan to tell you everything is going to be exactly like this, because I think the board is discerning, and I think the people in the curriculum committee, the faculty, the academic dean have to understand, give both input, but also understand what the board decides to do for the future, so that we know how to adjust in terms of also changes in the curriculum and in the way we do other things, including advising. So I would say maybe that you're right, it's not ready, a new plan.
Right.
What, years ago we called the new educational model, but the two things are intimately related.
Yeah, they are, but they're probably not as separate as I'm describing them. In my head, I'm describing them that way because right now I am most intimately involved in some of the financial, structural, location things, right? And when Gabriella and I get together every week, we're talking about other kinds of structural things, some of which we don't have the answers to yet. And also because, for real, this entire staff has been immersed in the ATS self-study. And I just want to give a shout out to every member of the staff who has been outstanding in working on this practically all year long. It is a massive document in preparation for our visit in September. And they have been just amazing. So just know that about the faculty and staff. Okay, great, thank you. Anthony, you're next.
I don't know how my hand got raised, other than I got kicked off and just got back on. I don't have a question. I don't have a question at this time. I'm all ears.
Okay.
Thank you. Good to see all y'all, though.
See you. Somebody, who's next? Craig. Thank you, Craig. Hi. Can't hear you. We got to unmute you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I'm an old person, and I was around Starr King back in the late 60s when Robert Kimball was there. I was raised Unitarian in the Bay Area and was involved in political action, anti-war, civil rights efforts, and all that. And I think it was interesting to hear Isabel's question and your answer. And one of the interpretations I have of that is that we're not addressing their future in higher education anywhere, frankly. We're stuck in an old paradigm on so many levels that fundamentally is linear and not cyclical. And I think that is really the beginning of how we start getting things wrong. And then that same thinking cannot solve the problems that created it. So there's, and I think also that when we look at the moral bankruptcy that our society is in right now, in particular, I've never seen it worse in my lifetime. And we're all culpable. We haven't done a good job. And how do we address these things in vastly different ways to, I mean, the tuition, when I went to college, and I went to an experimental college where the sophomore class went to India in 68, 69, $3,000 a year. And now it's 10 times, 12 times, 15 times that. And an education that's largely looking in the rearview mirror.
So I'm curious about what question you might have for us in relation to that.
What are the three top reasons why the increases are happening? And where does the physical plant fall in that category? Those are my.
Those are your questions. All right. So this building costs $100,000 a year to run if we don't do anything. If nothing breaks, if nothing goes wrong, if nothing is bad, it just costs $100,000 a year to run it. Ask me a question, so I'm going to try to answer it for you. And one of the things we've been trying to think about, just on a plain physical level, is does it make sense for us to leave this building, find a place that's more efficient for us to run, and use that money in other ways? So there's just a plain old physical plant question about a building with a lot of deferred maintenance that was originally somebody's house that over the years became this school. So that's number one. Number two, tuition is high because the cost of education is high and the way that we educate is especially expensive. We have a high advising model that takes up a lot of faculty time and staff time. In most other schools, when you have an advisor, you walk into your advisor's office, your advisor signs your papers, you walk out and you don't see them again for a semester. That's not how we work here at the school, right? Number three, higher education is expensive, period, and it has nothing to do with us and so much more to do with structural things that, some of which are completely outside our control. Tuition here does not begin to cover what it actually costs to educate a student, and that's true in every school. It's especially true in theological education. So those are the reasons that I have to offer right now. Do I have a solution for that? I don't, not yet. What I hope we will be able to do is mitigate that to some degree so that people who want to come to Starr King are not as stressed about coming, and that we can do the education that we want for our students and that people come here to get.
Well, let me just say that I have a background in energy conservation and would offer my knowledge to you if there's been an energy audit of the building to greatly reduce that $100,000, because I'm sure there are major ways that could be reduced.
I wouldn't doubt that for one moment. Hold on, I'm getting mic. Does this help people better? Can people hear me? Whoa, I can hear me better, even if you can't. And some people are saying that's not helping. They're still working on that. I want to thank you for that offer, Craig, and we're going to move to the next person. I can't read that person.
Real quick, so we next have Amanda asked a question about
we have somebody on this chat.
Do we know how much tuition will increase after this quarantine?
We do not. Someone asked, do we know how much tuition will increase after this current increase? The current increase is going to $775 per credit. What we tried to do was look at GTU schools, what they were charging per credit, and our sister school, Meadville Lombard, and what it was charging per credit. We didn't feel like we could charge $850 a credit, which was what Meadville charges. So we wanted to try to keep ourselves in line with the credit costs here at the GTU and still increase tuition moderately. One of the structural problems that the school has had over the past decade or so is that it has not kept pace with the costs of educating. We can't possibly charge people what it costs to educate them. I'm not saying that, because that's not even feasible. But what we did want to do is make sure that we met some of the needs here at the school and kept pace with the costs of education as our peers do. Gabriella, did you have something more to say about that?
So I would also say that as many of the ethical issues that need to be addressed is also compensation for most of the people in staff and faculty. We had a systemic issues of undercompensating people that comes from generation before us, and it's still here, and it's part of the many questions that also needs to be addressed. So definitely increase of tuition affects the students, and definitely how much we compensate most of the staff for the fact are also questions. So how to build a model that is truly sustainable, but not just sustainable for the student or sustainable for, some staff or some faculty, but for everyone. And that a conversation about how much it costs really to educate and how we can change that, but also addressing what is present needed to be part of that class.
I really want to affirm that. It's been one of the most difficult parts of trying to alter this model in the 5 years that I've been here. Every person in this building who works is not paid as much as they need to be paid for the work that they do. That's completely separate from what it costs to live out here. I'm not even talking about that. I'm just talking about if you do this particular job, in other situations, you'd be making 20% more money. How do I solve that problem? I don't solve it alone. I work with the board and try to figure that out. And that's going to be something that has to be a long-term solution. We can't do it just with tuition either. Tuition is not going to solve that problem either. So just know that that's why when we talk about new beginnings, we're not kidding. We're talking about looking at every part of how Starr King runs and trying to figure out how to structure new ways of educating people in really important ways and keeping to our values as counter-oppressive people. Because counter-oppression doesn't just involve the students. It also involves everybody in this building. So, Amanda had a question on the chat. Okay, Becca, where are you?
I'm here.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks for being here today, talking with all of us. I wonder if you could just give us a sense, a more clear sense of the range of options that are being considered. I heard you talking about partnerships, that other schools are entering partnerships with other entities. I heard you talking about leaving this space and finding another space. I've also heard elsewhere the possibility of moving more to an online presence. So I would just love to hear from you what you see as the range of options that are under consideration.
Sure. The FAQs that went out with the New Beginnings announcement will answer some of those questions, but we do expect a couple of things. We do expect that we are going to leave this building. We are at least a year away from a final decision on that. So nobody's leaving here. If you're coming back to school in August, you will all still be here. And if you're coming for symposium, we'll all be here. This time next year, we'll have a much clearer sense of whether or not we're leaving the building and where we are going. When we think about partnerships, there are institutions that we have begun conversations with, so I can't talk about who those institutions are. But one of the things we're trying to explore is there an opportunity for us to embed in another institution and maintain our independence? Is there a possibility for a partnership with another institution and running the school that way? And all those things are at beginning stages, so we can't talk about them a great deal. Gabrielle, is there something you want to add?
Well, I would add that I'm faculty representative on the board. I left with a strong sense after the last board meeting that we realized after considering the three areas of possible work that the work of the three task forces, that it's very unlikely that it's only one thing that will fix the situation. It needs to be a very comprehensive approach where some changes and possibility addressed by the three different task forces will have to find solutions that work together. So my sense that the board at the last meeting had the idea that there's not one magical or the one thing that will fix everything. That we have to discern how strategies from these three different areas of work can work together to find a sustainable future. So,
I want to also piggyback on that and say that we imagine that ultimately these solutions will occur in stages, because some things won't be ready. Some things may happen in a year. The next part of it may happen in the next 3 to 5 years. This is not a short-term solution. This is something that is going to take several years to build out. Let me tell you a little bit about the working groups. One group worked just on the financials. One group of the board was just working on what are the money challenges. What's it cost to run the building? What's it cost to educate students? How much scholarship money do we have? How much money do we need to raise? All those kinds of things. One group worked on partnerships and mergers. That's one of the things that I'm working on. Are there people, institutions, places that might share our goals for a counter-oppressive way of educating people? And can we partner with them? So that's the exploration. And there's one more group.
Well, the third is
just the building.
One was looking at both the educational model and the business model and thinking what can we change to have the situation sustain independently or even with our partnership, but not a major merger.
Right. Also, we're examining our capacity to expand the way we teach online. Now, we've been teaching online for 15 years, so that's not a new thing for us. But what we have noticed is that for the first time, I think it was last year, the number of people who take classes and study with us online is greater than the number of people who are in what we call high residence, even part-time. And so we are examining that to find out whether or not that is a trend. Is it because it's so expensive to live here that online education is the only viable option for our students? Is it because we don't have housing of our own, and if we found housing, would that change? We know that PSR closing its housing just 1 more year for students to be in PSR dormitories before they close their dorms to anybody but PSR students. And we know that that's had some effect, but we're trying to gauge now how big an impact that's had. If we had housing, would that make a difference? So those are the kinds of things that we're having to examine. And so that's why I want to reinforce what Gabriella said. No one thing will solve the challenges that we have. It will be lots of things that we've been examining over this past year.
They asked if you could repeat the last working group that we had.
The last working group was about how to maintain the independent identity of the school, while reworking first the educational model, and then we suggested the whole business model, possibly with a partnership with other institutions, but not a major merger.
Maybe to help do just one more as quick summary of the three groups together for everyone.
Okay, so there's the group that worked just on the money. All the different financial challenges, how much it costs to run the school, how much it costs to educate students, and how much money we needed to raise, what the endowment looked like, all those things. One group is just working on the money piece. One group is working on who our possible partners might be, whether it is embedding in a particular school or moving and partnering with another institution that shares our values, looking at who all those partners were. So for example, at the very beginning of the process, we looked at every school on the West Coast that had a history of Unitarian origins. Believe it or not, there are a lot of undergraduate institutions that were started by Unitarians, including Stanford. So we were looking at all this group of people who might be up and down the West Coast, Reed and Portland, things like that, so that we could look at where our partners might be found. All right, so that's the second group. The third group was looking at our educational model, the ways in which it might need to change no matter what decision we make about physical space. Does that help? Okay, great. Who's next?
Lisa Nicole is next.
Lisa Nicole. Oh, hold on. Can you hear me? Can I
Yep.
hear you?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm applying for January for the MDiv program,
Yay!
and but that it's a 3-year program at least, and so that kind of puts this change right in the middle of all of that. And so obvious questions are what's going to happen. I live on the ocean side, the west side of, I guess you can't see it, but on the west side of San Francisco. And so I come across the Golden Gate, or I come through the city and down over there. And if our options, do options include, like if you move within Berkeley or someplace, or toward Oakland, I mean, that's fine. But if you move out further into the East Bay, or in somewhere else in California, or somewhere else in the United States in the middle of my program, obviously, I would either have to go to completely, distant online, or go somewhere else or do something. Could you speak to that? Are you looking at those kind of options?
We have almost certainly ruled out moving out of California.
Okay.
Half of our students come from the West Coast of the United States. A lot of them come from California, Oregon, Washington State. So, but we're not prepared to leave an area that has so much resonance for the work that we do and the people that we serve and the history of the school.
Okay.
So we were looking at that. We basically said, unless some amazing opportunity presents itself, we're staying in California. We can't really, at this moment, envision Southern California. It just doesn't seem to make sense to us. But like I said, we're not closing doors on things. I'm just explaining what, in this first round, it makes sense for us to stay in the East Bay. And so the question is, how do we do that, right? Number two, even if we were making some ginormous change, students would still have to be educated through the end of their program. So one of the reasons, for example, you can tell we're not closing is because we're not talking to you about a teach out plan. You can't just close a school, by the way. Just so you know, you can't just like put a lock on the door and say goodbye to everybody. Students have to get their degrees. So you got to stay open long enough to make sure that everybody graduates. So I want to make sure that everybody walks away with the clear sense that we are not closing the place, right? So I want to encourage you to have more conversations with us about your goals as a student, and know that you will be more than, I think, more than satisfied that we can ensure that you have the kind of education that you are looking for from Starr King, even amid the conversations we have to have about our future. Because people like you are the reason we're having these conversations. Like all of you. All of you are the reason this is happening in a large degree. We need to make sure that people like you can continue to be here and get the counter-oppressive, transformative theological education that we promised you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi there. Can everyone hear me?
Hi. Yes. Hi.
Hi. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see folks' faces. I have a couple questions, but I'll start with this one. And maybe it's good to put it in a gardening analogy because it's that time of the season, and I see Ariel there also. You know, we're talking a lot about almost what would happen when we transplant the school to some other place. And I hear that and completely understand that we don't have any answers at this time for where that new location might be, or exactly, you know, who are partnerships, who else is going to be in the garden, etc. But I'm concerned about the health of the seedling before we even try and transplant it anywhere. And you know, some of this touches back to Isabel's question on where is, you know, a vision of eco factoring in. But my question is more kind of about the administration and maybe what is or isn't happening while these other decisions are being made. So, you know, for example, we've had this tuition increase. I understand that there was a need for a tuition increase and that we were a little overdue on it, but I was really troubled by the fact that registration opened and students were registering for classes for 5 days before even being notified that the courses they were enrolling in had gone up, or that their degree was now going to cost, you know, almost $4,500 more. I know, being on staff at the school, I see how we haven't had a director of operations since August. And actually, correction, you know, Matthew and Shannon have been filling in that position. But with all the shifting comings and goings, and the fact that, you know, so many of the new people who've come on have left, and we've just dealt with, you know, I think even 3 registrars since I've been at the school. I'm curious about kind of what's, you know, yeah, I don't know another way to put it besides how can we be sure that the other things that go into the student experience and the faculty, because the two are so closely intertwined, how is that being held while these other conversations are happening? You know, I guess I have concerns about of how that looks when students, you know, what the structure of the student experience will be like next year. And I'm curious where those conversations are being had at the administrative level, and what we're doing to make sure that, you know, we're not reinventing the wheel over and over again while these other big changes are happening.
Well, I can't promise you that we won't be reinventing something. I have to say that when Sarah Epster, my assistant and director of operations, died last summer, it left a big hole in the school. And in some ways, some of the things that Sarah did were irreplaceable. She had a skill set that is very hard to replicate. And there will be things that for a time may not happen in the way that they've been happening. We are making cuts to administrative staff. and shifting things around so that some of the things that a director of operations might do are being parceled out among many people. And that process will probably continue over the summer. I'm hoping that by the time fall is here, we will have a better sense of who's holding what, and that people will be slightly more comfortable with how things are being managed. But I can't promise you that anyone will ever be as good as Sarah was at managing what was basically 3 jobs. And that speaks to the infrastructure of Starr King and the way in which many people here do more than one thing. And it's something that I really want to end. My goal before I leave this place is that everybody have 1 job each. That would be a real victory for me. That's not going to happen soon because of the staff adjustments that we're going to be making. All we can do is do our best, have a staff, and we have a fantastic staff that does more than its share. And I'm hoping that we can begin to make adjustments that will make some of this easier for the staff and for the students. If you got specific suggestions, write me an email, but we're going to be working on that over the summer. Okay, who's next? Mira. Hi.
So my question is again in kind of the visioning realm. And first, I just want to say thank you for involving us in this process. And it's helpful to me to hear that that the vision of the school is being held in this way, and that I think that including us helps with the sadness of like losing some things, like that there will be some things that are lost along the way, whether it's just the building or certain ways of doing things or whatever. But like I can see that you're holding the core of it, even though we might lose some of the other stuff. So I think that it helps to be involved. And my question is around the way that the school has changed over time already, away from just being a UU identity school and into, it seems to me that at least half or more of our students are not seeking to go into UU ministry. And I'm curious how this change, if there are partnerships that are leaning into what seems like a special opportunity for Starr King to have multi-religious partnerships, to have spiritual but not religious partnerships, where it seems like a lot of the energy and the life school is coming from right now.
We really think that it's important to connect to the multi-religious piece. That's always been part of the eco vision, part of the reason that Baba used to talk about the organic multi-religiosity that we needed to cultivate. Has to do, I think, and that's just, this is me talking, I regard that as a key part of my Unitarian Universalist identity. And when I talk about this, when I talk about it with donors who are not as thrilled all the time about our multi-religious identity, I remind them that our congregations, our Unitarian Universalist congregations, are multi-religious spaces. We just pretend that they aren't. But if you have a religious community in which 85% of its people used to be another religious tradition, and then they come into our space, you can't ignore that because they still have roots and connections to that. In the same way with the spiritual but not religious people. In my last few years of parish ministry, I had this wave of people who were coming to us as unchurched people, people who had never had any kind of religious community. And so the whole idea of religious community was new. So I think that that has to be part of what we hold all the time, remembering that there are great needs among people who don't necessarily have what we would refer to as a church home, but who in the space of all of the pressures of the culture need community and a place to find and honor the sacred. I think that's a key part of our job. And I think that it's something that we can do better than anybody else at the GTU can do. Gabrielle and I are not quite ready to talk about some changes we want to make around the multi-religious work, but we think that we need some internal strengthening of that, and we're looking now at the best way to make that happen in time for classes. So we'll have more to say about that soon, but know that that's very much a part of what we care about. You're welcome. Who's next?
The next question we have is it possible that we might have more hybrid options for our growing distance?
I think it is. I think it's going to take a minute. I really feel like hybrids and every kind of online learning that is,
They want to repeat the question.
I'm sorry. Oh, could you repeat the question for me so I can repeat the note? Are there any opportunities for more hybrid classes here at Starr King? Yes, because we're going to be looking at the curriculum. That's having those options are a natural opportunity for us to look at how the school needs to change in ways that meet the needs of the students who are here and the ones that are coming. It is a lot harder for people to imagine picking up their whole life and moving to a part of the country that nobody can afford to live in. So we need to be cognizant of that, and it's something that we keep in mind. We can't do those changes immediately because, for example, all the courses that we're teaching next year are already set and in the system. But when we come back in the fall, we'll be looking more at what needs to happen next academically. More.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that is important to say is that there is so much analysis and thinking that goes on about decisions we make or plans for the future that obviously we don't see. So in terms of it, but some of you have read, for instance, the APS report. So when we think about hybrid, we think how we need better technology, so the hybrid experience is much better. And so we need to think about how to scale it in a way that we do it with better technology. So eventually we can allow more students in the hybrid experience. Right now we can handle a few students when we have what we call for now a hybrid in the classroom. Then we listen to what overall school population says in a particular time frame. So we had time where most students were asked, that were low residency, were asking for asynchronous courses. Right. So you have to see that we always try also to listen to the larger picture of who is in the school and then make choices according to the larger picture, not always making what is best for one particular student by looking at the larger picture. So all of that is intention. Every decision entails so many, complex considerations.
When we talk about the interconnected web of all existence, we're not joking in here. Every decision that we make in here has some impact on another part of the system. It's very live for those of us who are trying to work through all these issues. It's just like a mobile. You touch one part, 3 other parts start moving. So we're holding all of these things in tension, and we're really grateful for an opportunity to talk about this with you to the degree that we're able to talk about some of these things, and to hear from you about some of the needs that you have right now that we can throw into the pot We can't promise you that everything that is of concern to you is an issue that can be met, but we can promise you that we give those things real consideration and try to balance your requests and your concerns with the larger needs of the school as a whole, which is why we wanted to do something like this, which is why we're doing another one this evening for people who are at work right now. It's important to us to have all of this information as we're making these having these conversations. The board is really serious about making as broad a canvas for this as we can, even as we have to make decisions that in some cases may turn out to be painful and sad for some of us. But what's most important to us is to make sure that the transformative education that Starr King provides is here to educate for another generation, for 2 generations, for 3 generations. Starr King is 115 years old this year. So it's not a fancy anniversary, but to me it's important to remind everybody that we've been here for 115 years. And we weren't in this building. In fact, I totally wish we had the building Starr King used to have. But we don't. But what we do have is an education that matters in a world that needs people who are educated in the way that we do. So we are determined to make sure that that does not change. It's 10:30 here, and I know everybody didn't get to ask their questions. I hope that you all have typed them so that we can respond to them in some other way, either by email or an update on the New Beginnings page. Please know that when you see on the website the New Beginnings slider and you click on that, that's where updates will be. We're going to try to update it every month at least, even to say, okay, it's July, we're not working on anything right now, or there's no answer to this question, but we just want you to get used to the idea of going to that page to look for what's new and to tell other people to go there, in addition to writing to future@sksm.edu. Please make sure you list your questions for Matthew to kind of gather. And then you can join us again at 5:30 Pacific time. That's 8:30 Eastern time. If you didn't get your question answered, maybe I can answer it then. I want to thank you for being here and for loving Starr King the way we all do. See you later.